If and when a buyer asks me what's the best advice for getting an offer accepted, like how can I guarantee that my offer will get accepted on this home, I always say the truth is sellers really only care about three things. What's up, y'all? My name is Paul Winkleman. I'm a realtor here in the Twin Cities. I work for the To the Twin Cities team. This channel, my videos, they're all about helping first-time homebuyers, helping people understand the buying process, giving the best advice that I can to just kind of help make the process as easy as possible. It's kind of a big, scary thing, so I think any way to kind of alleviate stress is always beneficial. If you have any questions, if you want to pick my brain, if you just want to say what's up, you can shoot me an email at paul@tothetwincities.com. Find me on Instagram at paul@tothetwincities. I have a website, paulwinkleman.com. There's like a contact form on there that you can fill out. Any way, any medium you reach out to me, I promise you will get a hold of me. But this video is all about how do you get an offer accepted? Essentially, what do sellers really care about when looking at an offer? And I know for a fact that sellers really only care about three things. Sellers care about the most amount of money, the highest likelihood of closing, and the least amount of friction to get to closing. That's pretty much it. That's the whole psychology behind it. I think a lot of first-time buyers especially are a bit misguided on what makes an offer a good offer. And while there are ways that you can get an offer accepted by leaning into, pulling on the heartstrings a little bit, being a little more heartfelt, while that stuff can matter and play a role once in a while, most of the time sellers are just looking at this through the lens of risk and their net profit. So of the three, number one, the most amount of money. At the end of the day, it's all about the dollar bills, and sellers just want the offer that's going to put the most money in their pocket. Let's say a seller is looking at three similar offers. They all have a 7-day inspection, pretty similar closing dates. They all have very similar financing. But because of how it was written up, because of some of the terms, one of those is actually going to net them the most amount of money. Well, they're probably going to take the highest one that makes them the most amount of money then. And while I know that that might be a little obvious, there's more to it, and there's more that people usually miss, because it's not always about just putting the biggest number as the purchase price. Sometimes an offer at $350,000 could be better than an offer at $360,000. Maybe the buyers that put in that offer at $350,000 are paying their own closing costs, whereas this offer is asking for closing costs. Maybe there is an appraisal gap on the $350,000 offer and this other one doesn't have that. Maybe this $350K has fewer concessions, or they just feel like because of how it's written up, it's going to be a safer offer. Smart sellers are looking at kind of the bottom line and also able to differentiate, like, how realistic is this offer actually? This offer over here at $360 may be a higher number and may come off as more attractive, but the risk versus the reward on this $350,000 house may be much more worth it. Maybe the seller may know that this house will not appraise for $360,000. And so while you may think, hey, I'm gonna make more money, let's do that, there is more risk that this offer may actually fall through. What if it does appraise for way higher and the buyers are like, well, we can't cover that? Okay, well then the deal falls through. Should have gone with option A over here that had an appraisal gap coverage or something like that. I've kind of touched on this, but closing costs are a huge thing that I think come into play. Let's say you're offering $360K, seller pays closing costs. Let's say the other offer over here is $350K, but these buyers are going to cover their own closing costs. At $350,000, there's a good chance your closing costs will be maybe upwards of 10 grand, if not even a little more. So even right there, while this one looks better, they're kind of the same offer at the end of the day. Maybe this one has some more secure financing and that one ultimately wins, even though this one was 10K over this one. Number two, the highest likelihood of closing. What does that mean? This one in particular, especially in today's market, is kind of a big one. Sellers want certainty. They want to know that the offer that they accept is going to get to the closing table. And once a seller accepts your offer, I like to think that once the seller accepts your offer, they kind of mentally just check out. They have no interest in 2 to 3 weeks time finding out that the financing fell through or that the buyer got cold feet and now they have to go on the market. That is ultimately going to be just the biggest headache for the sellers. So the seller and the listing agent probably are asking themselves, does this buyer seem serious or shaky? Are there contingencies that might kill the deal? Is this deal going to survive the appraisal? Is the buyer's lender legit? Does he have a good reputation? That is also why a fully underwritten pre-approval is so powerful. Not all pre-approvals from every lender are created equal. Some lenders, maybe just run your credit and then spit out a PDF that says, yeah, you can do 400,000. Other stronger pre-approvals may have already reviewed income, assets, tax returns, all of those things. And seeing those things on a pre-approval will make a seller feel way more confident, way more comfortable in your ability to buy. And this is also why cash offers are so competitive, because there's no financing, there's no underwriting. It's like, hey, I got the money, I'll give it to you, we're good to go. Cash really eliminates the uncertainty. Like I said, no financing contingency, no underwriting, usually no appraisal, and overall, just way less opportunity for the deal to blow up later down the road. But if you are financing, which most people do, that can also come into play with this highest likelihood of closing. Conventional loans are typically viewed as more favorable than maybe an FHA loan or a VA loan, especially in a multiple offer situation, just because conventional loans have less restrictions and leave more room for leniency on maybe appraisal or even like condition of the property. FHA loans and VA loans have a very strict quality condition of the house that it needs to be in order for them to lend the money on it. And so maybe there's a house that's more of a fixer upper. They're looking at 2 offers. One of them is conventional and one of them is FHA. They might lean more towards conventional just because they're eliminating risk of having to make repairs in order to close on the home. And that definitely doesn't mean that FHA or VA loans are bad. Not at all. Honestly, I've helped a lot of people buy homes with FHA loans. Very few issues, obviously, again, it kind of just depends on the condition of the home. It just means that sellers typically perceive a conventional loan as maybe lower risk, maybe a smoother, cleaner path to the closing table. And then number 3, the lowest amount of friction. And I think this is something that people very much underestimate. And there is a difference between highest likelihood of closing versus least amount of friction. Sellers don't just want the best offer, they want the easiest path to the closing table. So essentially they're asking themselves, what's going to cause me the least amount of stress in the next 30 to 45 days? Every extra complication, bit of friction throughout the transaction just creates another opportunity for delays, maybe renegotiations, or worst case scenario, the entire deal just falls apart. So the things that create friction in a transaction: super long inspection periods, excessive contingencies, shaky financing, maybe even asking for closing costs from the seller. Difficult timelines can create friction. Maybe the buyer has a home that they need to sell in order to buy this one. That can obviously create a world of problems on its own. And also repair heavy negotiations, which is why I think understanding the inspection period, understanding your role as a buyer in the inspection period is super huge. And if I haven't already made a video about that on this channel by the time this comes out, I for sure will, because honestly, I am very passionate about making sure people understand what that's all about. Anyways, so what are the things that reduce friction? Clean, easy, quick timelines. Throwing down a significant amount for earnest money can reduce friction. And then things like flexible closing dates, limited contingencies with the offer, a lender that actually answers the phone, or a lender that you can actually get a hold of is so huge, not just for you as the buyer, but also for the seller, for everyone involved. You need to have a rock solid lender. And lastly, responsive communication. And I think that goes for pretty much everyone involved. Me as an agent, you as a buyer, the lender, the seller's agent, the sellers. There's a lot of things, a lot of moving parts, a lot of quick timelines, and very often you need good communication to get things done in order to not stop the deal. So the least amount of friction creates a clean offer. Clean offers just feel safer to the seller. And honestly, the safe route wins a lot in real estate. It's too big of an asset. It's way too much money, and there's, like I said, way too many moving parts to kind of just take chances. Sellers need to feel confident with the offer. So how do you actually write a strong offer? How do you make sure that your offer gets accepted? It's understanding these three things. Sellers want the most amount of money, they want the highest likelihood of closing, and they want the least amount of friction to get there. As a first-time home buyer, understand that your goal isn't always to be the highest offer. Your goal is to make the seller feel like they're getting a good price on their home, that it's going to get to the closing table, and that you aren't going to make their life miserable in the process. That's how you get offers accepted. No luck, no magic, just understanding what the seller wants and structuring your offer around that. See you in the next video. Appreciate you.